Session 111, and we continue with studying the Torah, which is called the instructions or the word of our Father. And the word became flesh in the New Testament, and he says in Matthew 5:17 that he came not to abolish this Torah, but to teach us how to really live it in full and how to understand it in full. And we love to study these Torah commandments because we can see how applicable it is in our lives, how relevant it is, and how it's teaching us not only on a physical level but also a deep spiritual level how to understand each one of these commandments and how it has an effect on society today and in our lives and in our families, and how it will have an effect on His kingdom and how we live in His kingdom, and how those who do not obey these commandments do not understand the heart of this Creator God who says, love me with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And one of the commandments that falls under loving your neighbor is that you shall not steal. And we discussed these commandments, and it's called property. All right, so we're going to continue today with Exodus 22, verse 25. If you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, you do not act as a creditor to them. You shall not charge them interest. Okay, very interesting, very nice. You all have bonds. You all bought your houses or your cars, or some of you might even have clothing accounts or whatever, but most of you understand what interest is about. You loan, let's say you buy a house for $1 million. After you've paid the house off over 20 years, because your bond is normally 20 years, you would have paid back $3 million, where the house originally only cost you $1 million. All right, and that is interest, and that is how the banking system and how the governments make their money. But we as believers, we don't make money out of poor people. The system makes money from the poor people because the poor people does not have the money to buy a house cash or to buy a vehicle cash. So they have to go to the bank, they have to borrow money, and they have to pay interest. So what the governments are doing, and I'm not saying it's wrong, I mean, that's how the banks and stuff make their money, but it's against the law of God. It's against the law to charge interest to a poor person that is part of His people. It doesn't necessarily say that you can't charge interest to people outside of Israel, outside of the kingdom of God. So, I don't know, does that mean that if you own a bank, that you can borrow money to people outside of your religion and then charge them interest? That is basically how the Muslims see it. They also don't charge interest to their own people, but of course they do charge a lot of interest to people outside of people in their own faith. Because as we remember, the Muslims also has a lot of the Torah commandments repeated in the Quran. Although they think Gabriel gave it to Muhammad, Muhammad actually spent a lot of time with Jewish people, and he learned quite a lot from them. But nevertheless, both the Jews today and the Muslims today don't charge interest to their own people, but they do charge interest from other people when they lend them money. But look at what God says. If you lend money to my people, to the poor that is among my people. Because if somebody is among your people and is not poor, he's not going to lend money. It's the people that is suffering and that is struggling that normally borrows money. And we all have gone through it. You borrow money to lots and lots of people that asks you and that you feel sad for and that you know is, especially people inside the faith. And it's very seldom that people ever pay back the money that is lent to them. But remember the parable Yeshua told? The guy that owed the master a lot of money, and he pleaded for his release and for forgiveness and for a little bit more time so that he can repay his debt. And the master forgave him all his debt. And yet when that guy went out, there was another guy that owed him a little bit of money, and he threw him in prison and he beat him and he said, you have to pay the money back. And the master said to him, how can you not forgive somebody who owes a little bit when I have forgiven you who owes a lot? So amongst the people of God, amongst fellow believers, we borrow we give, we help, we don't expect back. The Bible says your left hand must not know what your right hand is doing. You don't blow a trumpet like the Pharisees whenever you're on your way to the temple to go and pay your tithing. And you don't let anybody else know that you're helping the poor. And if they borrow money from you, you don't act as a creditor to them, God says. A creditor is somebody who will, you know the story that goes, the guys will come and break your knees if you don't pay back your debt in time. We don't act as creditors among the people of God. But even among other people, when you borrow their money, there's also commandments that actually says that it's against God's law to sign surety for other people, to sign as a guarantee for other people, because then you end up losing everything. So God also, He's not expecting you to just give out all your wealth and not expect anything back in return, but to the poor people in this community and to poor people everywhere. He wants us not to act as creditors, but to act as brothers. Why? Because if we just continue to hand out all our money to everybody that needs money, we're going to end up having nothing, right? I wonder. Let's see what God says, Deuteronomy 28:12. If you obey my Torah, then I shall open unto you my good treasure. The heaven will give you rain unto your land in the season, and I will bless all the work of your hand, and you will lend out money to many nations, but you will never have to borrow money from anyone. This is what God says. When we keep His Torah says that Exodus 22:25, if you lend money to my people, don't act as a creditor. So if you keep that Torah commandment amongst all His other beautiful Torah commandments, then God says that He will open the heaven to give you rain in season. He will bless the work of your hand. You will lend money to other people, but you will never have to borrow. That is what God says. If we obey His commandments, if we give out without expecting to receive back, and if we give out because we love our neighbor as ourselves, as His commandment says, then He will bless the work of our hand, and we will never have to borrow money from anyone. It's not always meaning that you're going to be rich. We do not believe in the prosperity teaching. I've been in churches where they said, just give the church all your money and God will bless you 100-fold and you will become a multimillionaire. Oh, really? We do not believe in prosperity teaching. Whether you have money to give, or your time, or your love, or your care, or just looking after somebody, it doesn't always have to be about money. But when you have this Torah principle, when you have this godly attitude towards your fellow brothers and sisters, and towards the orphans and the widows, and towards the Levite, and towards the stranger, remember all those commandments we looked at, then this is how God rewards you. He will put you in a position where you can help other people. And because you have a helping heart, like your Father has a helping heart, then He will bless you. He will bless the work of your hand. And your reward will be great in heaven. Not always on earth, but in the heavenly kingdom, your reward is being accumulated. And the best reward ever will be to stand in front of this God, and He will say, well done, good and faithful servant. But if we disobey, if we don't obey His commandments, then Deuteronomy 28 verse 43 and 44, the stranger that is within your gate, he shall be higher above you, and you shall come down very low. So when we don't help the poor and the stranger that is within us, and we don't keep the commandments of God, then these strange peoples will come up and will be above us, and we will be below them. What is happening in so many countries? People with strange ideas, people that are strangers to the faith of God, become our governments and become our leaders. and we have to bow down very low. We bow down as humanity. We are bowing before the New World Order. We are bowing before the governments of this world. We are bowing before the United Nations and the European Unions and the Trilateral Commissions and the International Monetary Funds and the banking systems. And we owe money on credit cards, on our houses, on our vehicles. We owe money in our businesses, and we are bowing down low. And there are strange people above us, like Pharaoh enslaved Israel. We are enslaved in a system because we as humanity have disregarded the Torah of God. The Bible says if you disobey God, if you disobey His commandments, then this stranger that is above you, he will lend to you. You will not lend to him. He will be your head. You will be the tail. You will be the tail. Down at the bottom, you are nothing. He will be the head. He will rule above you. He will borrow to you with interest. Because he, this stranger that is your head and your master in Egypt, he doesn't care nothing about the Torah. So he's going to borrow to you at very high interests. And most people don't ever get out of their debt. So important to understand that the Torah of God has got much more to do with our lives today than what we think. If we can keep His commandments in every aspect, we can live a life that is different to what this world is promoting to us and is marketing to us. And this world is trying to get us into more debt. Buy this, buy that, buy on credit. Get your credit score today, and eventually we all take the mark of the beast, because we have to continue being part of the monetary system, part of this world government banking money dollar system. How do we get out of this? Moses came into Egypt and he said, just leave everything behind and come out of Egypt, and I will take you to the promised land. God will take you through the Pesach lamb's blood to the promised land. That's why we need our Redeemer. He must redeem us. We are enslaved. Not only is humanity enslaved in physical labor, we have to labor every month. And at the end of the month, we earn a little bit of money, and then we just pay off all our debts. And we've got nothing left for ourselves. Our Redeemer will come and redeem humanity, those who follow His commandments, out of this whole system. And the Bible promises that we will one day sit under our own fig trees, and we will eat the fruit of our fig trees. We will not pay it to the bank anymore. Deuteronomy 24:10. When you make your neighbor a loan of any sort, you shall not enter his house to take his pledge. All right, so what is a pledge? A pledge is like a guarantee. Before I can borrow you money, you must give me something that is valuable as a pledge, something as a promise. You maybe give me your outer garment, or maybe your watch, or maybe you give me, maybe you've got some jewelry, something. You must give me something that I can keep hold of while you take your time to pay me back. Once you've paid me back my money, I can give you back your jewelry. That is the pledge. It's a promise that I keep with me. And that's very similar to what is happening when you borrow money from the bank. You have to sign guarantees. You have to prove that you are good for the loan. You have to show your salary slip. Sometimes you have to write them, you have to cede your policies to the bank, all those kind of things. You have to give your house as a guarantee that is serving as a pledge for the loan. So what God says, when we borrow money to our neighbor, to our, like He said, my people, when you help my people, your own neighbor, not strangers in there outside in the world, but within the community, you will not enter his house to take his pledge. So in those days, of course, they would have given maybe their clothing, or something like a donkey, or something they used that is very valuable, that they work with, something that the lender can keep as a guarantee. God says in verse 10 of Deuteronomy 24, "You will stand outside, and the man to whom you have lent, he will bring the pledge to you." Okay, beautiful. So that means that you don't go into his house and just take anything you want as a pledge. You allow the man to bring you something as a pledge. "And if the man is poor, you shall not sleep with his pledge." Okay, so if it's a poor man, and let's say he gave you his outer garment. Remember, garments, coats and stuff in those days were very valuable. So if a person gave you his outer garment as a pledge, remember Yeshua told the parable, and he said, if somebody forces you to give your outer garment, also give your inner garment. If they force you to walk 1 mile with them, walk 2 miles with them. Because in those days, the outer garment were many times given as a pledge to stand in as a promise for a loan. And then if you didn't pay back your loan, then that outer garment was taken from you. That's what Yeshua said. If somebody demands from you your outer garment, that means you owe them money. If they demand from you your outer garment, it means that you didn't pay back your loan. And then you must also give your inner garment. That is how the people of God must have that kind of attitude. But when you borrow money to a poor man, you don't enter his house and go take anything you want. He brings it to you. And if the guy's poor and he gives you a pledge, you don't sleep with it. You don't keep it overnight. In any case, you will deliver him the pledge back before the sun goes down, so that he can sleep in his own garment. So that he, while he's sleeping in his own garment, while he knows that he owes you money, he will bless you. And listen to this. "It shall be righteousness unto you before Yahuwah your Elohim." So, you've got all the right in the world to take a pledge from anybody that you loan money to. And you've got more than enough right to keep that pledge until he finally pays back his money, his loan. But the people of God, for whom it is more important to be righteous before God than to have money in their pocket, they will take that outer garment back to the poor man. They will allow the poor man to sleep in his clothes. Otherwise, tonight he's going to be cold and he won't be able to rest. So he won't be able to work again tomorrow because he's going to get so tired and he's going to get sick. So you allow him the pledge back. You don't act as a creditor to him. You act in kindness. You act like you act against yourself. You will like yourself to sleep in your own garment tonight. So that's why you treat your neighbor as you want to be treated yourself. And you give his garment back to him. And when he sleeps in his own garment tonight, he's going to bless you. He's going to pray for you because he knows that you had the right to keep his garment, yet you gave it to him. And when his prayer, his blessing comes before God, that will be righteousness for you in front of God. And that's why God can one day say to you, well done, my good and faithful servant. Matthew 5, verse 38 to 42. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that you don't resist evil. Whoever smites you on your right cheek, turn also your left. If any man will sue you at the law, and take away your coat, let him also have your cloak. And whoever shall compel you to go a mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to him that asks of you, and from him that borrows from you, do not turn them away. Beautifully how Yeshua in the New Testament confirms the deeper understanding of everything his Father taught, through him, the living Torah, in the Old Testament. Deuteronomy 24:17. You shall not pervert the justice due to an alien or an orphan, nor will you ever take a widow's garment in pledge. Go remember, alien is not now a alien from outer space somewhere. An alien just in some Bibles is translated as a stranger. So we are not to pervert justice that is due to the strangers, the orphans, or the widows. And we've looked at all those beautiful Torah commandments. For instance, you must allow the strangers to pluck corn on the corners of your field and to glean grapes and corn and wheat and whatever they need from your fields. You don't keep the justice that is due to them away from them. And if a widow borrows money from you, you don't even take her garment in pledge. Some of the other people, we've learned now in the previous verses, we can take their garments as a pledge for the money they've borrowed. But if they haven't paid the money back by sundown, if it's a poor man, you must give the pledge back to him. Otherwise, he has nothing to sleep in. But a widow, you're not even allowed to take her garment as a pledge in the first place. Yeshua says in Luke 20:45, "Then in the audience of all the people, he said unto his disciples, Beware of the scribes, which desire to walk in long robes. They love the greetings in the markets, and the highest seats in the synagogues, and the chief rooms at the feasts." That is what these people like. "But they devour the houses of the widows, and for a show they make long prayers. They will receive greater damnation. Their judgment will be so much greater because they were hypocrites." They walked around with long robes, and that has got to do with the tzitzit on the corners of their garments, appearing as if they are keeping the Torah. But the Torah says, "You will not take a widow's garment in pledge." Deuteronomy 24:17. Yet these scribes and Pharisees took away the houses of the widows when they could no longer pay back their debt. Right against the Torah that they are professing to follow. In speaking of the scribes devouring widows' houses, Yeshua was condemning the greedy, predatory way in which the scribes and other members of the Jewish religious establishment would not hesitate to mercilessly drive people into poverty. But they are not only chasing people out of their own houses into poverty, they are enriching themselves with those very same houses. Their demands for offering or payments in the name of religion, even if those payments would include the seizure of a widow's house, leaving her with nothing to support her and no place to live. We remember the Jewish religious establishment of the day when Yeshua was on earth was run by the scribes and Pharisees. It was run by officials in the temple service. Even the high priest at that stage was a corrupt man who bought his position as high priest. The Levites and the teachers and the prophets were no longer really very much welcome. And the whole corrupt system, since they returned from Babylon, and the scribes and the Pharisees made themselves leaders, and they started introducing all these man-made traditions and laws that is written up in the Talmud and the Mishnah and the Zohar, and they started teaching all these extra things that has to be done, and they're taking claim to so many things that they don't have claim over. And instead of looking after the widows, they would chuck them out on the street. Remember, we even looked at when Yeshua said, the scribes and the Pharisees even said to their own parents, "I can't look after you anymore because all my possessions is korban, holy to God." And by that, Yeshua says, you keep the traditions of your father, but you break the Torah of God. Despite being deliberately cruel, these scribes would then put on a visible appearance of being very religious by saying lengthy prayers in public or otherwise displaying their supposed holiness in places where other people would see them and praise them for it. Remember when Yeshua was standing in the temple and all the rich people and the Pharisees came and they threw a lot of money into the money holder at the temple, and then a little widow came and she threw in only 2 little small coins. And Yeshua said she gave more than any of them, because they enjoy all the tangible benefits that came with their status as members of this religious system, such as the seats of honor at religious feasts, or the synagogues during worship, or the church. Maybe they sit in front, I don't know. Yeshua said that their punishment in eternity would be greater, much greater than even, I don't know. Many people will be punished during the judgment, and some people will be punished more because hypocrisy is worse. I mean, a murderer will be punished for his sin, but he wasn't a hypocrite. He admitted that he was a murderer, and he lived that lifestyle. But scribes and Pharisees, and even us today, we need to learn from these lessons. We need to understand, even me, we have to understand that the moment we mix hypocrisy, pretending to be something you're not, pretending to be holy, while you're actually devouring widows' houses, not only in the physical but in the spiritual, that will be judged greater than all other sins. The Pharisees did not have to rob widows of their houses via any strong-arm technique or violence. They could easily just devour their houses through a maneuver. They could simply talk widows into deeding their houses to the Pharisees in their wills. And when the widows died, their properties would then go to the Pharisees instead of the rightful heirs or the children of the widow. This could all have been made to sound very religious, as the Pharisees hawked their schemes to aging widows. But the bottom line is that the Pharisees could transfer assets away from widows and their heirs to their own accounts, and they could do it legally. And we see it a lot today. There's a lot of churches, there's a lot of religious institutions, not only in Christianity, but all over various kinds of religions, where people will actually give their institution and their leaders everything, even make out their whole testament to the church. And when they die, their children gets nothing, the church takes everything. God's Torah says no. You bring your offering and your sacrifices, the best of your animals and the best of your corn and your oil and your wheat and your wine and yourself. You bring your tithing to the temple. But God doesn't want everything, because He wants to bless you with the rest. You bring your tithing. It is enough to look after God's kingdom. He doesn't need your money. He just needs your tithing to look after the Levites and the priests. But the scribes and the Pharisees brought in a whole new system of getting rich. The Levites were never supposed to get rich. They were just supposed to be looked after. But the scribes and the Pharisees were the whole corrupt system that permeates all the way into today's scribal and Pharisee system that enriches themselves out of poor people. Not talking about religion only, but as I said, and as I showed you, this whole world government system, the whole banking system, the whole Egyptian system that we are under is doing this, and they're doing it legally. Legally according to them, not according to God. Yeshua said to the Pharisees in Matthew 15, "Why do you transgress the commandment of God? Why do you transgress the Torah? By keeping your tradition. Because God commanded and said, honor your father and your mother. And he that curses, or he that brings trouble to his father or mother, let them die. But you say, whoever shall say to his father and mother, whatever belongs to me is a gift, it's korban, it's holy to God. With that, you do not honor your father and mother, because now your means of looking after your father and mother supposedly belongs to God, and thus you can't look after them. And by that, you have made the commandment of God to no effect by your tradition. So to follow tradition more than God, to follow the tradition more than the Torah, Yeshua is already condemning that in the New Testament. How much more today? We can't say to anybody, we can't look after you because my tithing must go to the church. If there's somebody that needs your help, use your tithing to help that person. Don't say like the Pharisees, sorry, Mum and Dad, go and die. I can't help you because everything I own is a gift to God and it's holy to God. I can't use it to look after you. Yeshua says those kind of people will receive greater judgment at the end of the day. Now we give as we have received, and as we receive, we give. Whether it is money or food or love or caring or anything in general, just think about your own life, how you want to be treated. That's how you treat others. And by that you display the heart and the attitude and the character of God Himself.